Hi, everyone. I hope you all can hear me well. I am speaking from a darkened hotel room in Portland. Uh, but I am Robin. I am the Senior Director of Product here at Knapsack. Um, really excited and looking forward to this webinar discussion. So hopefully you can see there. Yep. Really exciting panel discussion. Before I kick that off, just a couple of quick housekeeping slides about future events for us here at Knapsack that you're all welcome to join. We have a lot of in-person patterns leadership summits coming up. The next couple pretty soon, Portland this next month. Boston in July, San Francisco. I think I might be at the San Francisco one, and then there'll be specific dates for Seattle, New York, Austin, Los Angeles, and probably more coming up in the next few weeks and made available. So if you go to knapsack.cloud/events, you've got those all those dates, and you can sign up and register for those. They're really good opportunities, not just for the content, but usually a really, really enjoyable networking experience. Generally, some very in-depth and illuminating conversations with a lot of peers in the design system space. And then every week we're doing live platform demos of different parts of the Knapsack platform. That's every Thursday. You can also get the information about that at that knapsack.cloud/events. So yeah, if you want to check out different aspects of the Knapsack platform, different areas of the functionality, uh, new features and the like, then that's the place to drop in there. And then without further ado, I think we can dive into our discussion today and our panel with our speakers. I know that Jeff Crossman, who is head of design and design systems at JP Morgan Chase, is just running a couple of minutes late, but hopefully should be online very soon. And we've got ToniAnn Drenckhahn from BetMGM, Senior Manager of Design Systems there, and Ben Callahahn, who is the founder at Sparkbox and a consultant in the design system space. And really, we're going to be talking about the topic of democratizing digital production beyond just design. Oh, hi, Jeff. Jeff has made it perfect timing. Talk about democratizing digital production, a lot of different contexts and the like. So I'm going to stop sharing and just dive into the conversation with our panel. Let me get started then, really with a question, I guess, is like, for all of you, what does democratizing digital production mean? What is the difference between democratization and just adoption of the kind of design system standards and digital production guidelines that we have and often define?
I could go first, I guess. So I'm thinking about this question a lot and kind of like thinking a lot about the idea of democracy and what does that mean? Comes with a lot of connotations, obviously, but I think when we talk about democratizing digital production, it's this idea that we're creating systems not just from like a what's in the system, right? We're talking about shifting power and decision making a bit more outward. Um, in an effort to really enable a broader participation so that more people can build together, still without compromising, quality or coherence or, building with a sense of shared purpose. So it's not just what we're building, but I think when I think about democratizing it, it's more how we're building and how we work together to output something of quality.
I love that shared decision making, or I think a lot about sort of the cultural side of the work in systems is like making it so that everybody in every little moment of decision making, from the highest level in the organization all the way down to the lowest level, all those decisions they make are aligned. And that's like, of course, design system assets and documentation will help with all that, but it's really like you nailed it, ToniAnn, with like how do we make a decision, and that could be like in the product work, in the design work you're doing, could be in the engineering side of things, as you're writing content, like there's 1,000 places where that shows up, you know. So
Yeah. It's both contributing and potentially giving a team or a person a space to participate or have ownership of the system. And that could be maybe not necessarily the core system, but it could be a system of systems where teams and subsystems, and they have space to build and maintain, their own ownership and direction, and apply the system for their product space.
Yeah, so let's think about that a little bit. So I think there's different aspects of this. Partly it's how we view people's roles across the organization, um, and how we view workflow. Um, but when you particularly talk about things like the system of systems, how does that change, I think, the responsibility or the emphasis on where outcomes come from?
I think there's a unique space about the design systems where it's every company it's different, and that's sort of what keeps, I think, the group and the community on its toes. Is it shifts over time. What we had 5 years ago at Chase is different than what we have today. It's going to be different than we have in 5 years time. And the maturity of the organization can grow, and that could change the demands of the system. And you can really just, you know, take it to wherever it needs to go. Um, yeah.
I think a lot of that systems of systems conversation also comes down to, I know when we have it, and we haven't gotten there to like a building side of it yet, but we've had a lot of conversations about what will it take for us to get there? What will it take for us to feel confident in a systems of systems approach? And it's obviously not about like owning all the systems and making sure everybody is doing the right thing, but systems of systems gets at this idea because it gives you access to do what design systems do. Is design systems are an output of democratization, right? Like it's us taking all the things and then producing something that gives you a way to work within those frameworks. And it's the same thing with systems of systems. Like what are the ways that we're making decisions? What are the ways that we're all aligned on building? What are the principles in which we're building with? But then giving you a space to do that and execute that within your own product so that you're not saying, well, it's only actually these small set of people's responsibility to build components. No one else is allowed to do that. But really saying like anyone can build components, but let's actually align on why we're building them, what they mean, and what the shared standard actually is so that we can have systems of systems that work autonomously, but also still feel cohesive in what we're actually producing and what we're sending out, at the end of the day into our product.
that's an interesting one. Like system of systems, I think can be, I think a lot of us, when we hear that, we think of it as like a very formalized approach, where there is a core system that is maybe much more constrained and sort of foundational or fundamental. And then there are product domains where, either a product team or a group of product teams are responsible for owning and maintaining a system that is more complex, maybe in terms of like the type of components that are offered, right? And I think that's definitely a form of it. But I also think in at least what I've seen is in organizations where reuse is valued, that kind of thing happens by default, whether you have a core system or not, right? And this is where it's like when you first come into an organization like that, if there is no formal design system team, the work of going around and sort of just finding places where teams are already working systematically is so valuable. And so then you like insert the core layer in support of these already existing systems, or perhaps by bringing some of that systematic work into a more fundamental system. So I feel like it's just definitely a spectrum of approaches there, and I think different organizations kind of, you were hinting at this, Jeff, different organizations mean different things when they say that. So I think it's kind of like we could go in a lot of different directions on that topic. And I think I guess what I'm trying to get at is like that approach makes sense only in organizations where everybody's kind of incentivized to think systematically. And that's definitely not every organization. So I would say, in that scenario, you got to know if it's right for the org, for it to be a true democratization of that kind of work.
Yeah, I think touching on that and also what ToniAnn was saying about, the ideal design system is a result of democratization because I think we've all seen, successful design systems that have grown organically as a really a way to make more reusable and to refine good stuff that has already been built wherever it's been built in a company, in an enterprise. But I think we've probably also seen design systems, maybe even more so now because there's a greater kind of acceptance and understanding that, oh, a design system is something that is good, that we've seen more, we're going to create a design system from scratch. And it becomes a little bit more of a downward push rather than something that organically grows in an enterprise. And how much of that then is inherently cultural and how much of just democratizing that production requires a cultural change as well as an operational one?
I love this question. We have, and where we're going right now, we have more of a top-down push, I would say, for our design system. And I think you're exactly right. And this is what we talk about this on my team. I talk about this with a lot of other systems practitioners too, which is top-down's great. I mean, in some ways, right? Like that's as a systems person, you're like, cool, buy-in. This is like it lifts a lot off of what you have to do as your job in selling something upwards. But it does not mean it will be successful, right? And like this idea of design systems, it kind of depends on where you're starting. If you're starting from that top down, yeah, you're going to have to push more. Like the downside is you probably have to do way more cultural change for your organization through your work than if it started on the ground floor and now you're just doing upwards, maybe like leadership selling and buy-in. Like both have an upside and a downside, maybe depending on which one you like working on more. But we see that for sure in our organization. We have this design system, but what does that actually mean? People have to start working differently. We need to start thinking differently as a team to understand how do we enable democratization of what we're doing so that it doesn't feel top down. Because even with top down, nobody wants anything to feel that way. So how do you
Yeah.
like implement these strategies? And I think that's a really important thing for teams to acknowledge and then find their way through differences in organizations for sure. But it's something that we focus on a lot.
Yeah, I think most firms are probably striving for the top-down approach. I mean, if you start a design system, you're like, hey, I have a great idea for a design system. I'm an IC designer at a low level. Trying to get the push, trying to get the buy-in. You're trying to get people around you organized of it. Ultimately, you're trying to work up to the way where it's like, hey, this is the way we want to work at an organization. You get that top-down buy-in. So whether it starts day one or you're working towards that, I think getting that buy-in is a key crucial point because that gives you the social capital and the space to say, hey, we're creating this thing that's going to change the way that we work in this organization. So I wouldn't, yeah, seemingly everything with adoption and stuff is all about trying to get that leadership buy-in, saying this is how we want to work. So I think it's a great thing to try to get that.
I don't know if I totally agree. I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're saying fully, Jeff. So let me kind of share what I was thinking is like, I think it's a balance of grassroots and top down that's actually needed because the top down gives you, of course, what you're describing, right? Like the
Mhm.
budgets, the timeline, the space, all of that, which is totally needed to do this work. But the
Right.
grassroots is how you get the value, right? It's how you actually get, I would say, it's much better to get adoption through a grassroots movement of like engaging with consumers and understanding what problems they're actually facing and solving real problems for them rather than saying, let's change the incentive structure so that my boss gives me better, I get a better raise if I use the system. Like of course that's helpful.
Mhm.
But I think it's the balance of those, right? Maybe that's what you're saying too. I don't know.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've never seen an executive come up with an idea like this out of the blue that was not already happening in the organization. They may think they had a great idea of like, hey, let's do a design system. The chances of an organization being of a scale that they want it or need a design system and it not already sort of probably existing in some capacity within a designer's sort of workflow or within their files. I mean, I would love to see an organization where, designers weren't thinking systematically or consistently before an executive sort of came up with that idea.
Yeah, totally. I saw somebody once on LinkedIn. Sorry, Robbie, I'll tell one really quick thing. I saw somebody once on LinkedIn who I had no idea who they were, but their title was Design System Archaeologist. And I was like, what the heck is that? So I reached out and we had a conversation, and it turned out it was exactly what you're describing. It was like they had seen it was a big organization and they'd seen so many sort of organically happening systematic things that they dedicated somebody for a season to go basically just search the org, right? Like start digging, see what you can find. Where are we already working in this way? I thought that was such a real, I just love that approach. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that was what I was going to touch on is you do get those situations where I think you're right that in almost every company there will somewhere be designers and developers who are working in a systematic way. That's not always what is latched onto if there is a top-down decision to make a design system, and suddenly you start to have a clash between those two. But I think also more broadly, when we talk about democratization, um, and Freddie was touching on this in the chat just now, um, you can't have, or maybe it's not scalable to have involvement from everyone, but democratization to a certain degree, at least for me, implies a somewhat of a loss of control. And the design systems are also about governing and creating some control. So how do we make that balance? And do different parts of an organization have different views about that, where you can have competing desires, competing needs from maybe the executive level and the practitioner level and the product team level and a systems team level?
It's interesting you mention that like design systems are about a level of control because I don't know if I would agree with that. I think is it an output in some cases that you feel like you have control over things that are going on? Yes. Is that typically a false sense of control? I often think so in design systems teams. Um, I don't think it's about like letting everyone do everything. Like democratization, you can on the extreme end of that scale, it's everybody gets a vote, equal say, right? But it's really about when we think about systems, it's thinking about like what can we design in a system that lets people do the right things faster, um, like not opening up to a bunch of chaos, but thinking about structure that scales, like putting in guardrails into place that lets many people build one vision. When you have a company, you have a mission and a vision and a purpose, and there's a reason why you do all of those things. It's so that teams have a framework that they can work within, and it's broad enough that as you get lower and lower and lower to their levels, they can kind of make those decisions themselves. And I see a design system as very much the same thing. That's a system of how we make decisions at scale. How do we think about our brand at scale? How do we really push each other to go like, okay, this is what you want to do, but what's the bigger picture here? What's the context of either the user journey that you're not seeing because it's not your product, your area that you work on? What's the impact of the tech side of things that you're asking to do because you want complete customization and really forcing people to have those questions. So when I think about democratizing design systems, that's more what I think about is less about control and just giving people a structure to actually have really good debates about things. There's always going to be a shift in design systems, right? It should evolve. Um, but that evolution should come with from a thoughtful nature and not from like well, everyone raised their hand and like didn't explain their vote, but majority rules and we just go that way. So I think it's with anything, especially with systems, we always say like it depends, right? It's finding that balance and trying to go, okay, we can't have a dictatorship. It's not about control and governance, but it's also not about like enabling everyone to do everything. So where do we fall in the middle and what is your organization value? Some orgs might fall in more of that control because they're looking at speed and like stability as their important factors for decision making. Some orgs might say like we're in I don't know, like a brand evolution. We need creativity, we need fast thinking, we need all of that. Like, okay, what are the systems in place that we have to pull those levers? But it's always a sliding scale, in my opinion.
I think maybe parameters with which parameters rather than control is a better word. There's a parameters to have that discussion and parameters for it where creativity and discussion exists. Um, Interestingly, I think you equated control and governance. Um, and I guess governance is in particular often ends up being quite a controversial term when it comes to democratizing things, and it has probably more negative connotations than maybe it deserves. A lot of the time, I think when I think about governance, I've used this before when creating an example of we shouldn't be limiting people controlling from a technical perspective, but maybe should be from a governance perspective. I use the example that a design system, a product team should be able to build a Barbie pink interface, uh, technically able, and they should not do it from a governance perspective unless they're working from Mattel. Um, how do we balance that? How does governance work when you're expanding that kind of sense of ownership that democratization might imply?
I love that example, Robin. I feel like one of the things that I keep pushing for with in my work is I actually want the system to be ultimately flexible, like you're describing, right? Like you if you really needed to, you could go build that hot pink site or whatever, But I want the culture to be what creates the constraint, And that again comes to like the thousand decisions that somebody makes every day. It's like we have to take all these big ideas, the vision that our executives are casting, the mission, our values, and we have to just keep lowering those. We keep peeling away those layers until we can get to like what does that thing, that big vision that we're chasing mean for me as an IC building a product, And so that doesn't come without a lot of intention across all the different layers of hierarchy in an organization, aligning and then saying, let's peel that back. What does that look like for me as a leader? Let's peel that back. What does that look like for me as a lead? Let's peel that back. What does that look like for me as an IC? What are the behaviors you would expect? What are the norms that we have as an organization? So there's a ton of work to do there, and it's not something that only a design system team, those dedicated to the system, can do. It requires the rest of the org to jump in. So
Yeah.
at least that's how I've approached it.
And you can architect your design system to help promote that kind of culture and grow that culture. You can have the system that makes it easy to do the right thing or the correct thing while still allowing the behind the, peel away the veil and make it hot pink and Mattel if a team really needed to, they wanted to experiment or something. And obviously, you can build examples and additional artifacts around the system to help show teams how to put it together in a consistent way and try to make it easy to do the right thing rather than trying to make it impossible to do the wrong thing. And I mean, and it depends on the organization. Making it impossible to do the wrong thing may be the right approach in certain organizations. That's where we started our design system, the back to gather control and stop the fragmenting. We put rails in where you couldn't do that. Now the culture has evolved and grown, and we now need to evolve the system to enable just a broader product set and experimentation. So we're pivoting right now.
And this is where we talk about like layers of abstraction too, right? And you peel back the thing that you're being given. We all talk about like the recipe model, right? You can give somebody a fully ready to cook dinner, or you can tell them, well, you can take apart the ingredients you don't want, you can change it entirely. And so thinking about that flexibility is like giving somebody that needs something out of the box, whether it's because they don't feel like they have the skill set or just the need to create something completely new, but also going, there's layers to this system. We didn't just bake everything into one component and you can't do anything. You either use it or you break it, and that's it. There's a lot of nuance to that conversation. And as you teach more and more people, I think a lot of like when I think about governance in a design system, I think a lot about like education. And it's about teaching people how we think about design systems and how we build things systemically in bits and pieces, like in layers, so that if you want to remove that top layer, you can do it. And that gives people the like empowerment to really go, okay, I want to do something different. I'm not constrained by this system. I get the parameters in which they've thought about this, but I'm now thinking differently because insert product, business, whatever need you have there, design need, brand need. And now I can kind of go back to the systems team, have that conversation. And we're able to think about that. Okay, we see that team did this team did this. Now we're looking at changing our governance model at scale, changing what we actually ship at scale, because we see the teams able to engage in like intelligent conversation about systems. So I think like a lot of it also hinges on that education piece to be successful.
It's interesting to hear both of you talk about this from your perspective systems. Like, I think of governance more, less in terms of like my expectations for what consuming teams are creating. Like, I'm sort of the opinion that the system team shouldn't be governing that, but the system team should be governing what comes back into the system, what's innate, what the system provides. But I do think others I've talked with have thought about it more like a, we talk about sort of like design police, right? Like, which I hate that term, but like that posture, some system teams take that posture, right? Where it's like, don't detach, don't do anything that the system doesn't permit. So I don't think of that as a governance problem. Are we aligned on that definition or?
Well, I mean, the design system at its most sense as an input. Like you can try to drive product strategy, but you're gonna be doing it from the back seat because like, you're really only gonna be able to control what they try to put in their product, but they can obviously create custom and do whatever they want or override things. So you're not really getting a sense of control. You get your sense of control either by trying to make the inputs, do the right things easily, or you're seen as an expert of a system or systematic thinking, or just the visibility you get at a design system level where you're just seeing all these projects when everyone's working on, you have a perspective that very few people in the organization have. And teams come to you saying, like, hey, is this right? Is this good? Is this on standard? And you're able to sort of influence and govern via influence, which is honestly, I think it's a great place to be. And you can say, hey, I advise you to do this, or I seen this, and people sort of either take it or they leave it, but at least they're informed and they're involving you in that conversation.
Yeah, I don't know that you can get away completely from, as a systems team, from a level of like teams looking at you to provide an answer, right? Like, hey, I'm trying to do X. What is our pattern? I never like the word governance because I don't think it accurately describes what it is systems team provide. Because like when you think about governance, you think like laws and rules and all of these things where like if you break it, there is a consequence. And that's the world we live in, right? So that makes sense why you would think that way. But for governance of a design system, you are providing guidelines. You're taking input from what your org decided those guidelines are, and we're just here to make sure they all make sense at scale. Like it's not up to me whether or not we use a modal or bottom sheet. Like these are opinions I want the product design team to give me. Like this is what's working and what's not working. Great, how can we standardize that? And then when you ask us next time, should I use a modal or bottom sheet? Here's the set of rules we all kind of aligned on how we decision make. Like maybe they're just decision making processes that we're helping to repeat back and keep everybody honest with, we did say this is how we were going to make these component decisions or these pattern decisions. But I don't see it as governance in terms of like, you cannot break this, or if you break this, there's going to be a negative downside. So we're here to just open up that conversation and go like, well, if it's different here, we shouldn't force consistency for consistency's sake. But if it's different here, what does that mean? Are we actually talking about, well, the rules that we wrote really aren't working anymore, or are we talking about this being an edge case? So I think of governance and like guidance more than govern. But the guidance again comes from the collective nature of what the teams decide.
Yeah, a lot of the time I think about it as you're trying to create an environment where deviation from the design system is something that's intentional, not accidental. In the absence of a default, then yeah, we can fragment. In the absence of a default, that system of systems could become very, very fragmented. And I think a big part of that is potentially the trust that the design system have in teams to do the right thing, and the trust that all those teams have in the design system to be a facilitator and an enabler rather than a bottleneck. So organizationally, if we need that trust to support that kind of intentional approach to design, what are some of the ways we can kind of engage those teams, not just the design and development teams, but more broadly across the company, especially when you look at brand and marketing teams who are also part about how we present ourselves to the world organizationally.
I just love asking questions. I always think it's like trying to engage another team starts with trying to understand them. I think as design systems teams, it can be really easy to get frustrated and be like, I don't know why they're doing this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get this. Like, you think it's really obvious. We talk about these things, and then you don't see necessarily alignment. But 99% of the time, the reason why a team is not engaging with you or you don't understand what they're doing, and then there's some sort of friction between design system and other is because you don't understand what their goals are, maybe, and they're not aligned with what your goals are. They don't understand the value of what you're doing and how it can enable their goals. Like everyone's motivated by something that's usually not a negativity motivation. You know what I mean? People aren't just out to do things because they want to. There's usually something driving them. And so at times, I think it's like go and understand what that team is doing in order to engage them and to get engagement back from them. And then try to explain to them, okay, well, here's what I'm here to do. Like, let me share with you why we're here, what's the purpose of the design system, and what it is we're trying to do. And let's talk about what are your thoughts now about how we can help reach your goals, or how what we're doing is actually in direct conflict with what you're doing, and that's why you haven't been engaging with us because you're just kind of hiding from that truth. So I always start with like the path to engagement is to just get really curious first and then try to uncover, okay, like, well, what is the problem here about how we're not engaging? Sometimes it's just relationships do, and it can be as easy as like, oh, I just didn't know you existed. Cool. Like, enjoy talking to you now. But sometimes it's a bit more complex and you do actually have conflicting goals and you have to figure out how to address that.
And sometimes it's not just a design organization. Sometimes that conflict's either coming from product or engineering. There's some constraint that we don't know about that they're working on the engineering side, or their product owner is trying to take their product in a certain direction because they see them competing at this competitor and this other product is competing with this other competitor and they're in different markets with different solutions. Um, and the designers are sort of caught in the middle saying, hey, the system's trying to get me to do this and my product person is telling me to do this other thing. And who do I try? Who do I care? Who do I listen to? And so like, and that's a difficult spot to be in. And I sympathize that, and I hear it often when we have these situations of like, why aren't you following the pattern? Why are you doing this? It's like, well, like we're changing tech platforms, or my product partner is saying you have to go after this way, or and it's just in a tough spot, and you gotta get that sympathy, like ToniAnn mentioned.
Yeah, I think, Robin, to the original question of like, how do you engage with those folks? I definitely agree with Tony Ann's idea of like, ask a lot of questions. I do think sometimes if you're just asking, though, people know how to like say things that aren't going to frustrate you or so I think one thing that I've seen work really well with a lot of teams is to just actually build stuff together, like little working sessions, right? Where we just get together and it's a little hacky, right? And like we're just gonna like maybe we would try to build a pink page using the system and show people how to override if they need, right? So that they know we're not afraid of that, but also we have the opportunity to talk in that moment about why that's reserved for intention, right? As opposed to accident. So I think things like that are really powerful because then you're also building a relationship in the weeds. You can hear how they think as you like talk to them while they're working on something. So that I think that sort of like real time, hands-on in the trenches together can be really valuable too.
Um, Expanding on that, as you democratize, as you create this broader system of engagement across the company as a whole, um, we're also in an environment, I think, where a lot of design system teams feel under pressure to justify their existence, pressure to get funding from executives and executive stakeholders. Um, and I think sometimes that almost can lead to a natural inclination to like, no, the design system is ours, and therefore the value is ours as well. How would you approach that conversation with executive stakeholders, defining the value of a design system that is, and a design system team that is a cost center to some extent, but in a more broadly democratized environment where product teams and a system of systems might exist, whether formally or informally?
That's still the hardest question so far. Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Thank you.
We're both like, no, you do it.
All right. Um, I think I mean, it really depends on the maturity of the system and how long it's been established. I think maybe have depends on that. I mean, you've probably seen a lot of systems, and I think I got it from, maybe the Spotify system at one point where it's like it's embedded, everybody's working with it, everything's going great, and then someone has a great idea. Okay, everything's working great magically. We don't need this team anymore. Everyone can just keep going what it has, and it carries some momentum for a certain amount of time, and then things like everyone trying to side hustle a design system, eventually, it falls apart and then they have to, rebuild a team and start over. And I think, some organizations are like that. We're seeing, a lot of layoffs every now and then from organizations, and, maybe sometimes the design system seems caught up in that. Um, where it comes back is like there's the benefit of the componentry and the infrastructure itself to build the thing that's being built right now, but there's also with the system ingrained into your product, the leverage that you have to be able to change and pivot the organization is greater when you're under management of a centralized, not necessarily centralized, but a design system, a singular design system where you have leverage you can pull and it goes everywhere at a scale, and it allows the organization to maintain their software at a lower price. And there's a benefit to there where it's not just building the velocity of right now, it's the maintenance cost and the maintenance savings you can get from the system.
Yeah, and a lot of this I think about is you have to be so in tune with what's going on in your org, what they need over time, and then really ask yourself the hard questions for the team and like what are we providing and are we hitting those needs, right? So like early on, I mean, my team's in a fortunate position right now. We're not having to advocate for our own existence, right? Which is great. So early on, what I would love to see happen is for other teams to be loud about our existence. We're able to show our value because it's not me telling you that we should exist, but it's all these other teams being like, we need this team for XYZ reasons. Can we make sure we're building those relationships and building those partnerships that feel truly valuable to those teams so that we have people in our corner as we grow and scale? But there's also thinking about like, what's the thing that's going to capture the attention of the org? Like, maintenance is not a thing that anyone really seems to care about sometimes, right? And so we talk about like, well, where there's all these like little tasks and things that design systems teams do. I think one, you have to be able to articulate what the value of those things actually are. It's very hard to explain to non-systems people sometimes. So I think that can be a really hard hurdle to overcome. But then there's also probably some percentage of your time you should reserve for like, what is the team going to work on this year? That's like the little, someone was talking about it at Patterns. It's like the big shiny. What's the thing that your team is going to work on that actually does capture the attention, that looks at your company's goals for that year and says, this initiative is what's going to actually very clearly and very easily ladder up to my company's goals. We have to do all the maintenance. We have to do that. We reserve time for that. But how do you like really stay in tune with what's going on? There's not really a one size fits all approach. Every year, the purpose of your team is probably going to look very different because what your company needs is likely very different. What the teams that are using your system needs are different. So if you get to a point where systems is working and everyone's got that system knowledge, then your team really doesn't serve to exist teaching everyone about design systems. That's not a necessary need. Like maybe you're passionate about it and that's really awesome. Maybe there is still some level it has to happen, but that can't be the sole purpose of your design systems team, is to bring systemic thinking to your company because it already happened. So what else? Like what are the other gaps now?
Yeah, I love that. I think there's this, I don't know if it's an unfortunate truth, but sort of an unknown reality that a lot of folks before they get into systems just don't think about, which is this job of, you know, oftentimes people who are even just ICs in an organization have never interacted with an executive are all of a sudden put in conversations with the executives where they have to like make the case for this stuff. And the truth is that systems are easy to sell, right? Anybody on this call I could say make a case for why a system should exist if efficiency is what we care about, right? It's easy to do that. Everybody knows that. We've done that 1,000 times. You've read those articles. Same thing with consistency or with accessibility. There's a bunch of things. That means though that the value of all of those things, because the system does all of them, the value of each of them is kind of lowered, right? It's like it does everything for everybody. And that just doesn't like make sense to people. It's like, well, that can't be true. So I think in my experience, what we try to do is have a regular cadence of conversation with executives separate from each other, because they all are sort of tasked with like there's a big vision for the org in for the next quarter, for the next 6 months, for the next year. And each of those executives, right? Like if we just think of like whoever's over product, whoever's over engineering, whoever's over design, this sort of like core level of folks, they're in those positions because they're creating healthy friction for the org, right? They're the ones sort of fighting at that top level for how do we actually play that out, whatever that big goal is. So they all actually have different needs. They all have different things they care about. And so we have to sort of isolate them from each other and understand their needs and then tell the story to them in a way that makes sense. And this means that as design system leads or practitioners, it's not enough for us to create really good systems. Like we also have to be looking out into the future and saying, what are they gonna need in 6 months? There's like a vision casting thing that has to happen because the sales pitch to that executive is about the next 6 months or the next year. It's not just saying, look at all the good stuff we did. That's never enough. So I think there's just so much work there that we don't ever talk about. It's not in any job description for a design system person, and it's half the work, or a third of the work at least. So I love that we're exposing some of that here in this conversation.
Yeah, it's I think well, my degree, by the way, is in politics. So talking about democratization and design systems
Perfect.
is perfect for me. But I suppose there is an aspect when you think about the democracy that we're really talking about how, if you think about healthy democracies as well, in general, you're talking about effectively speaking to and then representing the needs of different constituents. And that's what we're talking about here as well with different narratives. I had a former colleague who was a practitioner, but their very blunt description of that narrative is executives care that it's fast and they don't care that it's good, and practitioners care that it's good and they don't care that it's fast, um, which was the very simplified but very blunt their interpretation. But generally, you're talking about different narratives for about the value of a design system to different parts of an organization. Um, and that I think is where we can really engender trust by crafting different narratives. But you're right that for a lot of people working on the design system, that's not a natural part of what they thought their job was going to be. And maybe that's just the nature of careers. You have to become. My own politics degree has become more and more useful the further in my career I've gone. Um, when we talk about, and you were talking about, we're not at a point now where design systems are, oh, we're going to introduce systems thinking. It is what's next. Um, so are we seeing a transition in how people think about design systems? I feel like we've almost had that. There was the chunk of time for digital design systems where they were like embryonic as a concept. And then you had like some of the big ones at Google, at IBM, at Salesforce. And then there was a kind of general acceptance, we need a design system because systems thinking is useful. But if are we moving past that now? What is the kind of next stage of evolution for design systems at scale?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, we recently talked about the future of design systems in the forum Ben hosts, and I don't know if we're moving past it yet. I don't know if we're at the next stage yet, if I'm being not at scale. I think in these conversations with practitioners, with people who deeply care about systems, and with some of the organizations who probably have been enacting and implementing them in a mature way for much longer. Yeah, maybe there's the what's next. There's AI throwing into that conversation now. There's a lot of tools throwing into that conversation now. But I still get the sense that at large, we're still kind of in those maybe past two iterations that you're talking about. And depends on what org you're at, and it depends on the maturity of that org. But we're still talking about systems as operational things, as people, as like the change. And I don't think the majority of, from what I see, that we're quite onto the next yet. I think we still have a lot of selling to do to make sure that the general population of not only designers, but product and engineering, and then those business leaders see design systems as operational people problems that we execute in different ways using different technologies and trying to find the latest and greatest. But that sticking point is something I still do spend a lot of time on and selling in my organization for sure.
Yeah, I think as long as there's people, there's a role for a design system to create product. I mean, it's at the end of the day, what we do is try to align an organization, the people, to sort of act as one or act as one as closely as possible. And so as long as you have people creating things, whatever tools they're using, whatever AI aids they have, there is a need to align it. And I think we'll just evolve as we need to create new things to keep people aligned as the tools or the processes evolve with technology.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tony, and in the conversation that we had around the future of systems, one of the things that I think we both saw was there was a large percentage of people who answered that question by just saying very normal system things, but it actually works, you know? So I think there's still a very large population of system practitioners who are feeling maybe more, you know, I don't know, exhausted by the work than energized by it. You know, like it feels like their wheels are spinning or they're just treading water and they're not making progress. And I think that to understand that there's like a whole lot more work to do, you know. It could be the culture of the org. It could be, you know, the people they're working with just aren't on board with it. You know, I mean, there's a thousand things that could create that, but it does feel like there are some organizations that appear to have it done well, but once you get in there, you know, it's never quite as good as it seems. So I do think we have a long way to go to see these things deliver on the promises that we've made. I feel like most organizations would say if you ask them, what promises did you make and has the system met all of them? Most organizations would say no to that still.
Yeah.
I feel like that. I don't know if that's true, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's half the problem, right? Is like, were those promises we could make for a design system? A design system is a thing. Can they actually deliver on what we're saying design systems can and should deliver on? As we scale out and we're like, well, no, because if you build a really, really great system, but no one understands how to use it and no one understands systems thinking, and then no one gets why we're even doing this in the first place. No one even agrees we
mhm.
should be systemizing all of this stuff. Should that have been the promise that design systems make, or should that have been a promise that an org makes? This is what we care about. We're going to use a design system to help us get there. And I think that's where we still have a long ways to go in the world of design systems, right? Because I think like the broken promises of design systems is something we like we see often a lot in Medium articles and talks and all of that kind of stuff. And it's definitely very true. But I'm always like, I don't know, we can't do this alone though. It's such an acknowledgement that while we can lead the work, we can't realize the dream in just a system space. It's got to be a democratization of this. It's got to be everybody brought along to really feeling like, nope, this system is helping me and it's driving what we need to do here. But I am also very committed to this goal, and I am very committed to stability at scale. I'm very committed to thinking about like design and engineering as like an infrastructure type of thing that we're going to enable to get there. Um, if we don't see that, I think we're not going to be in the next phase of what is design systems thinking about until we get more people outside of design systems to say that's what we're here for.
Yeah. Um, to follow on from that and about ways in which we can demonstrate value, we got 47 minutes into a webinar about digital production without mentioning AI, which I think is pretty impressive. Um, but when it comes to design systems and it's like demonstrating value, how might AI help us, and how might it hinder us?
That's a big question. There's so many
Oh,
things. I mean, I know of a bunch of cool things people are doing, of course, experimenting. I think the hindering, like what I think I don't want to see is um, large language models or other forms of AI that are trained on a pretty terrible set of like web properties that exist in the world today, just being used to generate more garbage. So like I would love to see us refine that and like find ways to kind of create more accessible, more standards, more of the things that we know we need, as people who care about this stuff. I think it's so easy to make a bunch of crap. And so I
Mm.
think that means people will just make a bunch of crap, and I don't want to see that happen. So that's sort of where I'm thinking about how do we adjust the future a little.
yeah. I've talked with some of our content team, our technical writers that do our documentation for the system, and I could sense. I mean, if I was in their position, you see this AI, and this AI does lots of text creation, lots of text generation. It's really good at that kind of stuff. Where's my career? What am I worried about? And I told him, like, your job's going to get more important, when AI comes, because all this documentation and the stuff that we have that very few people probably actually read or read in depth, and it's hard to access because it's just the volume of it is so large, is going to be more important because it's going to be more accessible and referenceable by a tool, an AI LLM tool that can help bring people into this content and use this content to surface specific direction and help as they're trying to make decisions on how they use the design system or how they build their product.
I feel like it's always a double-edged sword too. Like AI can help. There's a lot of tedious tasks we do in design systems, and I can see AI helping with doing that type of stuff, right? Like there's finding things and replacing them, going to look for where my, variables exist that I can't find, that I don't know how they relate, like those types of things. Like AI can help us multiply our impact from like I wish I had more people on my team. Okay, AI can really help us do some of that stuff. But I also think there's a risk in having AI do too many things for you, right? So we've talked about like maybe, spotting patterns with AI, but how much value, what do you learn as a design system practitioner by going through that process of doing the audit and looking for the patterns? Like it's not just that audit that AI could accelerate. It could, right? It could help identify this stuff for you. But I know in my time doing that, like at an IC level, that enabled my entire career at a single company to know that information and to go like, no, I know what's going on here, here, and here. I'm a person who can now help in many different aspects of not just a single component audit. I can use that knowledge because it's kind of ingrained in your brain. It's that process of writing something down, not because you're going to go read it, but because writing it down helps you remember it. And I know, Ben, you've talked about this too, which is like documentation. We say like, oh, hey, I can create our docs. But there's a lot of value in actually going through the process of creating documentation because you do learn and uncover a lot that helps enable your future conversations. So I think we have to be careful too about what tasks we try to throw on AI and just ask ourselves, like, what am I not learning because I didn't do this myself? Or can I now leverage AI to make sure I'm still able to learn that information? I think we're very, very quick to just like throw AI at a problem can kind of be the danger zone sometimes if we're not at least acknowledging what we're missing by not solving that problem ourselves.
Cool. Um, yeah, I think the AI, I mean, as Freddie said, how long is a piece of string is kind of the answer to anything, any question to do with AI at the moment, including design systems. I want to wrap up just very quickly with just kind of like a quick like 30-second, 45-second question for each of you. That when we talk about democratization and we talk about expanding the reach of our design system beyond merely adoption, is there a single piece of advice that would jump to your mind about that you would give somebody who's trying to expand their design system's reach in that way?
Find what the organization cares about and where it's headed, and then build the system or pivot the system to help in that mission.
I would say talk to your consumers more, just get to know them. Like if you don't know what they need, it doesn't matter how good your system is, so.
I would echo both of those, and I'd add building in daylight. In an effort to democratize, it can be easy to make that a voting system, and like I have to talk to everybody, I have to consume everything, and everyone's got to be up to date and in the know. But if you're building with visibility, it gives people that way to opt in or a way to go, yep, they got it. I know what's going on. It's a feeling of democracy without it meaning it's literal democracy. And I think that's the line that maybe building in daylight can really help you with.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panel. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's been a really interesting and ongoing discussion. I think that particularly the AI aspect and AI around design systems is an area that maybe hasn't been super delved into by a lot of the generative code and generative vibes coding kind of apps and functionality. So I'm curious to see the direction that goes. That's something that we're very, very interested in from Knapsack's perspective. And I look forward to more of these conversations. So thank you, everybody, to the panel. Thank Ben, ToniAnn, Jeff, and we will see you at the next webinar, hopefully.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks.